My name is Gabriel, and you are watching Regent Park TV. In a major step towards addressing systemic anti-Black racism, the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee has adopted a motion introduced by Walid Khogali Ali, a Regent Park resident and member of the committee. The motion seeks to push forward key recommendations from the Ontario Human Rights Commission's OHRC from Impact to Action report, which critically explores the prevalence of anti-Black racism within both the Toronto Police Service, TPS, and the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, TCHC. Khogali Ali's motion recommends that the city invite the OHRC to present its findings and recommendations from the report to the committee, offering valuable insights into the systemic challenges that Black Torontonians face. The motion also calls on the Toronto Police and Toronto Community Housing Corporation, along with other city agencies, to present their existing anti-Black racism initiatives, with a focus on adopting the OHRC's recommendations for deeper reform. The From Impact to Action report highlights how systemic racism continues to affect Black residents in Toronto, particularly those in public housing and interacting with law enforcement. The committee's decision aims to ensure city institutions are not only aware of these challenges, but actively working to address them. Stay with us as we take you inside City Hall for more details on this critical issue.
We'll go to item CR 4.2, Advancing Action on the Impact to Action, final report on anti-Black racism in Toronto Police Services. This was brought forth by a member, Walid. You can speak to this. You can just give an overview of this item.
Just before I speak to this item, I just want guidance from the chair and city staff. If I want to amend the motion to reference just, and I want to move this, to reference just the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee and remove the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, Social Development, Finance, and Administration out of it. What's the process? Should I just be able to just move the amendment?
So you can speak to the item. You can introduce the item.
Okay.
Then questions can be asked, and once your turn to speak, then you can amend it if you like.
Okay.
And
excellent.
make sure it should be in writing, but you can work with the clerks for the wording of that.
Thank you.
So it's when you speak, that's when that happens.
Thank you, Councillor Moyes. So I'll quickly speak to this item.
So give an overview of this. This is your motion. So
yeah, so I'm just going to reference folks to the information that's already available publicly on the website. But I want to start off by thanking city staff. I want to thank Kemba and the rest of the team from the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, the city clerk for advice related to this motion. And this motion is centered on a review of the From Impact to Action report by the Ontario Human Rights Commission. The Commission did some significantly important work in evaluating data from Toronto Police Services and have offered some recommendations that are aimed at addressing systemic challenges. We all know that these findings are very important, and I think it's beneficial for our committee to invite a representative from the Ontario Human Rights Commission to present on the recommendations enclosed in the report. We also would like to examine the anti-Black racism at TPS, specifically how the recommendations have been acted upon by Toronto Police Services. When I think about this report, I think about the conversations I had with members of the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And my friends, I was actually pretty shocked about this new notion. It's called overcharging. I'm not sure if you've heard of this word, overcharging. I will explain what overcharging is. So according to the report, it seems that members of the Black community and Indigenous community get overcharged more than members of the white community in the city of Toronto. This is based on TPS's own data. And it leads to some really serious consequences. One of them being they're displaced from access to social services, one of them being social housing. So this motion also calls for a presentation from Toronto Community Housing, being our largest social housing provider, to look at these recommendations not just seriously, but to act on these recommendations. I actually appreciate the title of the report, which is From Impact to Action, because it's calling for action, not just discussion. And from my own personal experience being a community organizer and helping a lot of youth in our community navigate the challenges posed by this, by the impact of anti-Black racism, specifically when it comes to, young people in our community who get charged, go through the judicial process, go through the courts, and then years later are found innocent. The damage has already been done, right? These are young people in our community that are now displaced from social housing. They're now being displaced from access to social services because there were actions taken by those institutions to basically to evict them either from housing or prevent them from accessing social services. So I want to have a better understanding, and I think the committee will benefit from having a better understanding of what are the ramifications of anti-Black racism institutionally within the city of Toronto. Lastly, what I would like to speak about is I think this presentation will provide our committee with valuable insights into the progress made thus far and highlight areas where further strategic action is needed to continue to advance the committee's mandate. And I hope this will inform our 10-year action plan. So that's the reason why I put forward this motion, is for us to get the information from the Ontario Human Rights Commission directly, see how it connects with our 10-year action plan, and make recommendations to the City Council and the Mayor on how those actions can be implemented. Thank you.
Okay, we have a speaker, Beau Dakwazane. Are you here?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. That's so much better than calling in.
Okay, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to thank everybody for taking action, and everybody on the council for their work. It's important work. So I want to get in. I'm a community liaison. I'm behind several groups: Socialist Action, Black Lives Mutada, and I'm also a publisher. I wanted to address 3 areas, if I could. Transparency, breach of trust, and accountability. These are all recommendations. First, with transparency, I just wanted to say that it's important for us to have trust in law enforcement with open communications, transparency, and data on metrics such as race, sex, and other factors. Much of the data collected by the TPS, such as race-based data, is referred to and assumed as assumed racial identities, and is presented in a manner that is not usable or easily decipherable to accountability watchdogs, the public, or community liaisons such as myself. Nor does it break down police complaints that were dismissed due to being unsubstantiated claims, or why they were deemed so, and why these numbers are so high each year. My second area of interest is the breach of public trust. Our communities have felt that there's been claims of inequity and physical violence against pro-Palestinian protests. Individuals being charged with face coverings for using face coverings during demonstrations, we believe is a health right for people to wear masks. The dismissal of deputants' concerns and arrests of deputants at TPS board meetings. The OPIRD's lack of independence, police access to complaints are being used to investigate and intimidate public complainants. We have a use of tactics and threats of criminal harassment charges being laid upon civilians for recording the police and recording police misconduct. We have over-policing of financially burdened, unsheltered peoples, causing additional trauma to those already living through trauma. Disproportionate violence, intimidation, and arrests of Black, Indigenous, and Middle Eastern peoples. Police assaults on suspected drug users, potentially putting their lives at danger of heart failure and other life-threatening complications while they're on such drugs like fentanyl. And the last area is accountability. Despite Health Canada declaring racism as the #1 health threat to Blacks in 2020, millions of dollars were spent in additional police without any assessment on how this would affect the communities being negatively impacted by the increase, such as the Black and Indigenous communities who are overrepresented in our jails and in arrests. We have seen no additional money for additional training or screening of officers that would reduce the amount of profiling and racial targeting of Black, Indigenous, and Middle Eastern communities. And we are calling for more independent reforms, such as 100% civilian-led and community-led investigations and audits, a publicly and democratically elected police chief, immediate transparency and full disclosure of police misconduct in order for additional victims to come forward, and ending arbitrary dismissal of police complaints through biased police liaisons and Toronto Police Services self-investigations. That's my deposition and my recommendations from our community. And I just want to say thank you, everybody, for having me today. If anyone has any questions, I'll be putting out hopefully a full report in November, and I can provide it to your committee and as well as the Toronto Police Services. So.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the deputant? Seeing none, thank you for coming in today. Any questions from the members to Waleed, because it is his item. So any questions?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, you went through that so quick. So could we ask the member of the public that's making a deputation a question? Is that allowed, permissible?
Yeah, I just asked if you have
So you just went so quick.
Any questions for the deputant?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So I have a question to the deputant. Thank you so much for speaking to this item. You mentioned that the data that is being collected from Toronto Police Services, that is, it's not easily accessible to the public. Are you referring to the report made by the Ontario Human Rights Commission? I want to understand the gap in access that you referenced, my friend. If you could speak to that.
I was speaking more to the information available on the Toronto Police Services website in regards to race-based data and their plan. Yeah, the numbers on there are very vague, and they're very hard to find specifics. It will give a general number, but it won't break those numbers down. So it's very not telling of anything. It's just general information, and there's no conclusive evidence, in my opinion.
Sounds good. So my follow-up question quickly is, do you think the public will benefit from a campaign done by TPS specifically on the data, or another body, much more neutral body, like the Ontario Human Rights Commission, or the City of Toronto? Where do you think the information should be coming from, and with more clarity, as you expect?
I'm not sure where the information would come, but I would just prefer to see independent bodies, such as community organizations. There's been many community organizations who are directly affected, who work with the homeless, have had their complaints dismissed by the police. They have community members that they're trying to represent, and numbers that they keep as well, about incidents with the police and how it affects them. So I'd like to see more community-based audits.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. Any further questions from any other deputants here? Members? Seeing none? Thank you. Queen, you had a question?
It was more like a comment. Thank you for having me speak. I
Sorry,
agree with it.
1 second. Process is important here. Do you have a question for the deputant?
No.
Okay, so you'll have an opportunity to speak.
Okay.
Now we're going to ask questions of the mover of this item, Waleed. Does anyone online have a questions for Waleed? I'm not seeing any. Anyone in the room has questions for Waleed? Okay, okay. I do have one question. So your motion focuses on the Ontario Human Rights Commission around their action plan, but we have our own action plan in the city, 2019-2023 Toronto Action Plan to Confront Anti-Black Racism. Why didn't you focus on that report rather than the Ontario Human Rights Report?
Excellent question. I would like for the advisory committee to have a better understanding of the recommendations that have been made by the Ontario Human Rights Commission to inform our own action plan. That's the simplest answer I can give. But also to unpack some of the recommendations they've made. Some of the recommendations relate to the deletion of data when it comes to street checks. I want to better appreciate why they're making that recommendation, so that we all have a better sense of what sort of action plan that we want to implement in the city that is up to date, that is informed by work that's addressing anti-Black racism from all sectors and from all organizations. So I think this will be a great way for us to have that appreciation and understanding before we move forward with a final version of recommendations that we could pass on to council.
Okay, and do you recognize, so in your first item here, you're asking the Ontario Human Rights Commission to come and present to a city body. Do you recognize that that's not a normal practice, that another level of government comes to speak to advisory committee? Like this, I've never heard of this sort of thing happening since my 2 years as a councillor. I've never experienced this before.
You're probably, or the city clerk is probably aware of the procedures better than I do. I'm a new member of this advisory committee, but I don't see a problem with other organizations that are connected to other levels of government to provide advice and share data. I think what's really lacking is the intergovernmental cooperation that's needed to address systemic anti-Black racism. We know, for example, at the federal level, we have some serious anti-Black racism issues. There have been news reports about this. There's been discussions within community about this. So I think we need to create a platform for dialogue between different levels of government to address anti-Black racism. So I hope members of the advisory committee support this motion so that that invitation is extended. If they choose to accept it, that's great, and we can have that conversation here. If they choose not to, then that's their own prerogative. So I think this will help us address systemic anti-Black racism at all levels, starting at the city level, because we are more concerned with the city.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none. Okay, speakers to this item? Any speakers to this item? Online? Don't see any in the room. Huh? Sorry, Queen, you did want to speak to this item. My apologies. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you for having me speak. I actually changed my mind, but since I'm up here, I'll say something. I just wanted to thank Waleed and the speaker, for their comments, and it's so important what they were speaking about. I just wanted to comment about stacking, which is the other term for what Waleed is talking about, and they do this so that to instill fear, and so that people will, take the lesser charges. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucina, you want to speak to this item?
Yeah, no, just briefly. I think, thank you, Waleed, for bringing this forward on multiple occasions and stressing the importance of it. I do, I fundamentally agree, how critical it would be to understand, I think, what's being done to address the recommendations. And specific to how I think the recommendations are worded, I do think the report itself is quite detailed and speaks, for itself. And so I guess my suggestion would be for members to kind of read and peruse and digest the report. But what would be really critical, I think, for us as a collective to understand is what exactly the TPS is doing. So I agree to your point on intergovernmental, I guess, collaboration, transparency, that piece. But I think really getting down to what the TPS has done to address those recommendations, I think is probably of utmost importance. So that piece, recommendation 2, is especially, I think, critical for us. But in terms of procedure, I don't know how that would work, but I just wanted to stress that I think having TPS themselves really be at the center of this be important and useful for us as a committee.
Thank you. I'll speak to this item as well. I agree it's a very important issue. I do have a motion, actually. You could put it up. To replace recommendation 2, to really focus on our action plan and not the Ontario action plan from 2019 to 2023, Toronto Action Plan, Confronting Anti-Black Racism. And I do agree, this is a very important issue. We've all been impacted by it. I'm a Black man who grew up in the city. I've been stopped by the police many times, right? I've had my own experience and trauma as well. And I know that many young people still experience that today. We're all aware of the carding issue. But like I mentioned in my questions, in that it's not normal practice that we have an intergovernmental body come into this setting, especially from the level of government. There, we have mechanisms to make that happen at the city. I've been part of many of those already as a chair of Board of Health. Just recently, in the last month and a half, I had the Minister of Addictions and Mental Health, both provincially and federally, here at City Hall with the mayor talking about addiction issues. Those are the tables that we have those conversations. Another difficulty I have with this motion too is that Toronto Police have their own board and their own mechanisms to dealing with these issues. These are very complex issues. These are not new issues. Also, Toronto Community Housing is also mentioned here. They have their own board and they have their own procedures when it comes to dealing with these issues as well. And I feel uncomfortable working outside of their system in that regard. But that being said as well, one of the action plan that we have been focused on here at CAPRAC is our own action plan for the city. And I feel that that's where we should keep our focus, not in the Ontario government itself, which we have actually no control over. So those are my brief comments on this item. I hope my recommendation for item 2 will pass, but I mean, overall, I don't think I could actually support this in the way it's presented here. Those are my comments. There are 2 speakers online. I can't see. I can't see. Dr. Daniel, go ahead. And then Queen, I believe. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone, and so thank you so much for presenting this this motion with it. And I'm wondering whether or not, to what extent there has been any discussion, and Councillor Moise, you talked about the trauma related to interactions with the police, but to what extent has there been any work that looks at the impact of racial trauma, specifically in relation to police interactions with Black youth and Black communities, because what we're seeing anecdotally is that there is an increasing presentation of suicidal behaviors amongst Black youth and young adults. So I'm wondering to what extent we may also want to extend this discussion to not just look at the legal impacts of police interactions with Black communities, but also the mental health toll that it takes on our communities.
That's an excellent question, Dr. Beverly.
A procedure. So I guess you're asking me that question because I have a motion on the floor, and I just spoke to it. So you're asking me a question on those issues?
I'm asking both a question and making a comment.
Okay. I'll speak to it briefly. Again, this is a complex issue. I know when I was at the school board as a trustee, we're having conversations at those tables as well, because again, it does impact our Black kids in the education system. And those are conversations that we continue to have not only at the school board, but also at the city level as well. I don't know specifically the data. I don't have the data in front of me, so I can't really speak to it. It's not my area of expertise. I'm going to say that out loud. There are people that work in the city that deals with this on a daily basis, including CABRAC as well and other city departments. So, I mean, that's all I'm prepared to say on this issue. I'm going to step out of procedure because procedure is important at these tables, and I'm going to have Waleed speak for 30 seconds on this item.
Yeah, so I'm just going to pose a question about the amendment you put forward. We've all...
Sorry.
This is the amendment. I'm speaking to your motion, right?
Oh, give me 1 second. Sorry. Alimo, you had your hands up. Go ahead. I have a speaker's list here.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to make a comment. I'm not as well versed in procedure as I don't work in the city as well, but I did want to say that the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit is itself very unique. So I really commend Waleed for thinking outside of the box, because sometimes the way that we've always done things may not be the best way to do things moving forward. So speaking, I guess, or commenting on that motion as well, I'm for, I guess, extending an invite and seeing what if they would be willing to come and speak with us, because I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Who else has? Anyone else online had their hands up that I missed? No? Okay. Wally, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to speak against the amendment, and I'll speak against the amendment for the following reasons. We're right now in the process of updating our 10-year action plan. I think this amendment actually makes the motion that I introduced irrelevant because it's just going to be focused on the 10-year action plan that the city has already adopted and approved. The purpose of this motion is to inform the process to update the next reiteration of the 10-year action plan. So I think extending an invitation to the Ontario Human Rights Commission to better appreciate what the recommendations are and what they mean and how it could be incorporated in our 10-year action plan is more germane. I think that starting off our conversation with Toronto Police Services to see how those recommendations have been implemented, and later on extending that invitation to Toronto Community Housing, and then hopefully other city divisions is also germane, because we have to have a better understanding and appreciation of where the recommendations are being implemented and which ones are not, and whether there are resource implications associated with those recommendations as well that we need to consider. So I want to encourage members of the committee to not support the amendment so that we do pass this motion and extend the invitation to the Ontario Human Rights Commission to gain a better understanding, as well as other city divisions to see the progress of the implementation of those recommendations. Thank you.
I think, as I've mentioned, the plan will be completed in November of this year, so just so you know. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Chair. My hand has been up for quite a while. I think you are not...
Oh, my apologies.
That's fine. So, in line with Walidi's motion, I find it really very important. And I'm just wondering, it's 5 years from 2019, 2023, Toronto Action Plan for Confronting Anti-Black Racism. In line with his motion, do we have some impact assessment report for the 5 years of this Toronto Action Plan for Confronting Anti-Black Racism, which can show us which recommendations have been implemented and those have not been implemented and why, such that even these boards you're talking about, they have leadership. Why don't we work with them to make sure that some of these recommendations are implemented across, the city?
You want to speak to Kimba?
Through the chair, thank you. I just want to clarify, you're looking to understand what the impacts of the current 5-year plan was in the summary form? So there will be some information in our final reporting on that, but we also have had annual reports where we have documented what the impacts have been. So there will be some information in the new plan as presented. Sorry, not in the plan specifically, but in our next report. But we have been tracking the success of the report through each annual report to City Council.
Just a follow-up question. Is this accessible to the public?
It is. It's online. All of our reports are online.
Okay.
Do you want to speak to the final report coming out in November?
Yes, absolutely. So as I shared earlier, the town hall will feature our draft recommendations, and then from whatever comes out of the town hall discussions, the actual report will be going to committee on, I believe the date is this end of November, beginning of December. I can't remember the exact date. So at that time, City Council or committee will be taking a look at it. So this particular report going to committee will be within days of the next CABRAC meeting. So there wouldn't be time for this presentation to inform the final report going to committee.
Okay, good. We have more questions. May, go ahead. And then Shannon.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to make a comment to also agree with Walid, and I believe Halimo said something that was similar in terms of, doing things in a certain way and following certain procedures. This is called the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, so I think we need to be very we need to live in that name and confront anti-Black racism where it exists. And sometimes things are done a certain way and have been done a certain way, but I understand certain procedures and working and liaising and facilitating certain things are unheard of, but there was a time where work like this was also unheard of, so I don't think that we should shy away from, taking this next step because there is a lot of important data and information and stories that need to be shared. So, just wanted to make that comment.
Okay. Thank you. Shannon, go ahead.
Thank you. My question was just if we could share on the screen again the amendment put forward by, so we just have a minute to digest it in light of Waleed's request to the members.
Okay. We'll do that. We can do that when we're about to vote. Kathy? You already spoke, Waleed?
Thank you for recognizing me. I'm actually would like to have some clarity because I'm hearing two sort of nuances within this conversation, and I'm not sure whether this is an issue about procedures. I mean, it does involve procedures about who's invited to speak. However, is the question really about whether or not information that is found in these reports is not currently included, and then somehow we're seeking ways to get that information into our report and our recommendations as part of CBRAC? And if so, are there not mechanisms to actually do that? So I actually need a little more clarity about what it is that we're really just trying to sort out here.
Sorry, Dr. Massieu, so can you just ask your question again? I apologize.
I'm hearing a debate here
Yes.
in regards to whether or not the Human Rights Commission should be invited to speak and to talk and speak to the reports that they have authored. Mm-hmm. And so, is this really the question, or the question is really about whether or not we are going to acknowledge the report that has been prepared and address the issue, the recommendations which were raised within our report. So what I'm hearing it sounds like, I'm just asking for some clarity about, is it really about who comes to speak to our committee, or whether or not the content of the report is actually considered in what CBRAC is putting together, and I see those as different solutions.
Oh, okay. So just to clarify, because I think there's an interchanging of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee versus the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit. And so what I'm hearing is, and Waleed, feel free to correct me, that there is a desire to hear from the Ontario Human Rights Commission in that any recommendations that they would bring would be able to inform future work of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit. And so that it's what Waleed is putting forward is one will inform the other. So I hope that clarifies for you. I can't speak to what Waleed is saying, but that's what I imagine is we can receive what the Ontario Human Rights Commission is putting forward, but also how that information is used is what I assume Waleed is offering.
And the information is also public as well. So I know some members have read it, CAPRAC members have read it, we've all read it, so. Waleed, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. So just to answer Kathy's question, thank you so much for articulating it really well. We have a mandate as an advisory committee, and our mandate is not just to make sure that the 10-year action plan is implemented, but also to provide advice to council and the mayor's office. And there's a lot of things that need to be unpacked from the Ontario Human Rights Commission's report, specifically the report that's focused on the data that was collected from Toronto Police Services, that introduces new challenges that we were not aware of, that were not considered in the previous iteration of the 10-year action plan. So this, I think, is just a way for us to do our due diligence as an advisory committee to consider all aspects, to have a better understanding from the Ontario Human Rights Commission, so that we can inform the next iteration of the 10-year action plan. The motion that's been put forward by the chair as an amendment takes away the Ontario Human Rights Commission out altogether. It's just focused on the previous iteration of the 10-year action plan. And I think that basically is defeating the motion, right? Like if this amendment passes, it will be mute. It will basically saying we're gonna go back to the process as is. We're not inviting the Ontario Human Rights Commission. So that's why I'm encouraging all members of the advisory committee to reject the amendment, for us to pass this motion, for us to extend an invitation to the Ontario Human Rights Commission, for us to gain that understanding so that we can inform the next iteration of the 10-year action plan and not put forward a plan that is, devoid of that knowledge, devoid of those experiences that will actually make it much more effective. You had a question, Kathy?
Go ahead, sorry.
So, Waleed, are you suggesting that there is information that could be provided that is not read, that is not currently within the report, and is that what? So the question is where is information gathered from? So are you suggesting that the information that is in the report is perhaps might be incomplete, and that additional knowledge could be learned by the invitation?
Yes. Well, the first invitation is already there. I don't think there's amendment to not invite. The second part of the motion that's critically important is making sure that we have that conversation with the city division heads. Specifically, I'm talking about the chief of police for Toronto Police Services, whoever's the representative for Toronto Community Housing, to better appreciate, have they read the report? Are they acting on those recommendations? Because these recommendations are going to all municipalities across the province of Ontario. But this specific recommendation that are highlighted in this report focus on data collected from Toronto Police Services, which is, we're the largest city, and I think that data is so important for us to better appreciate. So to answer your question directly, yes, we will gain a better insight of what those recommendations are, but most importantly, the status of where we're at when it comes to implementing those recommendations. Because if there are resource implications to implementing those recommendations, we have an obligation as an advisory committee to let City Council and the Mayor's office know that we would like for those specific pieces to be resourced so that we come up with better tangible results when it comes to the implementation of those recommendations. I hope I answered your question.
Okay. Go ahead, Lucina.
Very quickly. So thank you, Waleed. I think I want to, again, stress and emphasize that the Human Rights Commission led the independent investigation of a body like the TPS to bring accountability to that body to do better, right? And so I think what I'm worried about and what I'm hearing is that I'm afraid that process is going to get in the way of our role as members to bring accountability also simultaneously to those bodies, which is why I also take issue with shifting some of the discourse to the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Action Plan, because I do think that as members, we have a responsibility to put the pressure on and to say, what is the TPS doing? And sure, that can be contextualized within the broader city agencies and the different actions that are named within our internal plan at the city. But I understand that the TPS has their own governing body, their own accountability bodies, but how are we bringing them to account? We have a responsibility to do that as members, and I think that this motion is innovative in that way, and that we're questioning how we're doing process, and that we should be reaching out to get the answers that we need. And I do want to raise that in March 2024, just by doing, a cursory Google search, it sounds like the Ontario Human Rights Commission had a deputation to the TPS on the implementation of the recommendations, and the Toronto Police Service Board responded that half of the recommendations required clarification, so to speak, to what sounds like an evasion of the implementation of the recommendations. And so I think it's very timely, given that this was just in March of 2024, to say it like it is and to act on this. And I think it's very timely, and I think it's bold, and I think that we need to consider that as a whole. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And just my closing remarks in that, as Kimba has mentioned, our anti-Black racism report is coming to committee and council in November. And also to, as an advisory committee, we can invite the members or the divisions or the boards that is listed here, but we cannot force them to come. They are not obligated to come. So you could ask, but that's all you can do. And based on my experience with those organizations, I'm not sure they would. Okay, go ahead. We do have a long agenda.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna use 1 minute. I think this committee should be reaching out to other organizations doing a lot of work in anti-Black racism. And one of them is the Human Rights Committee and also the Black Action Class. They've done a lot of work, Nicholas Marcus. I hope, and it's my prayer, that the report coming up in November will have views also collected with an interaction from these other players, like the Human Rights Commission, but also the Black Action Class, because they've been at the forefront of also trying to dig out some of the injustices happening also in public service. I've been following up the reports. So I think our role as an advisory committee is also to include the views of those people who are out there in the community doing similar work of fighting anti-Black racism. And my prayer is that the report in November will have views also captured from these players.
Okay. Thank you. I'm seeing no other speakers to this item. We will put up my amendment. We'll vote on that first. Okay. All those in favor of this amendment? I can't see those online. All those opposed? Okay, that doesn't carry. And on the amendment, on the item, all those in favor? Actually, you got to record it.
For clarity, did it pass or fail?
It failed.
Okay.
And on the original item, all those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. So that will go to ECDC, and the councils on that committee will decide what happens to it. I also sit on that committee.
The motion was adopted at the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee meeting and was then recommended to the Economic and Community Development Committee on the 18th of September. The focus of this committee is on social cohesion and the economy, with a mandate to monitor and make recommendations on strengthening communities, neighborhoods, businesses, and the economy. Now, let's dive into the Economic and Community Development Committee's meeting regarding the recommendations of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee's adopted motion.
Good morning, members of the Economic and Community Development Committee. My name again is Waleed Kogali Ali, and I'm a member of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee. And I'm here today to express my strong support for the adoption of item EC 15.8, which is the Advancing Action on the impact to action, final report on anti-Black racism in Toronto Police Services. This motion is crucial for translating the findings of the From Impact to Action report into actionable steps that will benefit Black communities across Toronto. As highlighted in CABRAC's terms of reference, the City of Toronto acknowledges that anti-Black racism is historic, pervasive, and systemic, rooted in Canada's legacy of enslavement and colonization. It's imperative that this committee, City Council, and all relevant agencies commit to taking concrete steps to address these systemic issues and promote justice and equity for Black residents. The CABRAC motion, which was passed about 2 weeks ago on September 4th, aims to ensure that the findings of the Ontario Human Rights Commission report are not only acknowledged but acted upon. This committee meeting provides a key opportunity for city agencies to directly report on their progress in confronting anti-Black racism, particularly within Toronto Police Services, but we also heard of the impact of overcharging, and Toronto Community Housing Corporation can also comment on that. These institutions, as highlighted in the report, have had significant impacts on Black Torontonians, and accountability is critical in moving forward. The Ontario Human Rights Commission's Impact to Action report, the first of its kind, combines hard data with the lived experiences of Black people, detailing the extensive and long-standing harm suffered by Black communities due to discriminatory policing practices, the evidence of systemic racial discrimination and anti-Black racism cannot be ignored. And I hope members of council can pay attention to what I have to say, since some folks are chatting on the side. The inquiry found that TPS practices and activities disproportionately affect Black people, contributing to racial profiling and discrimination. The OHRC has developed 107 recommendations to address this systemic anti-Black racism, and they're committed to holding TPS and Toronto Police Services Board accountable for implementing these recommendations through independent monitoring and legal enforceability. Some of the key recommendations include destroying historical street checks data. The practice of carding, as you all are aware, has been a foremost concern for Black communities, exemplifying how discretionary police power disproportionately targets and harms Black people. The OHRC found that TPS and TPSB failed to purge historical street check data, much of which was the product of racial profiling. Recommendation 63 speaks to how TPSB should consult with the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario to develop privacy guidelines for the collection, analysis, and public release of human rights-based data. Recommendation 64 speaks to how TPS must destroy personally identifiable information from carding, street check data collected before January 1st, 2017, unless there are active court orders requiring its retention. The impacts of racial profiling and carding have left deep scars on Black communities. The OHRC's recommendations are legally enforceable, and this committee must work with the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee and the rest of our City Council to ensure that TPS and TPSB take decisive, concrete actions to end this cycle of harm. I urge this committee to request updates also directly from TPS and other city agencies, divisions, or subsidiaries identified in the OHRC report, and also extend an invitation to Toronto Community Housing. Public accountability is essential in ensuring these agencies are making real, measurable progress in addressing the systemic anti-Black racism outlined in the report. Additionally, it will be highly beneficial for CABRAC to invite a representative from the Ontario Human Rights Commission to present on the findings and recommendations from the report. These insights will provide critical guidance on the next steps needed to dismantle systemic barriers faced by Black communities and help our city move toward a more just and equitable future. As we approach the next iteration of the 10-year action plan to confront anti-Black racism, it's critical to build upon the work initiated by the 2018-2023 plan adopted by City Council, a review of the progress made so far, and a commitment to further action in light of the OHRC report is necessary to continue advancing equity and justice for Black Torontonians. In conclusion, I strongly support the adoption of EC 15.8 and urge this committee to take meaningful steps to address anti-Black racism in our city. By advancing this motion, inviting the OHRC to represent, and holding city agencies accountable, we can begin to dismantle systemic barriers that continue to oppress Black communities in Toronto. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, the next deputant, while we sort out number 2, is Elena Targizadeh. Yes. Welcome
Thank you
to
very
committee.
much.
You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for calling me. This room is extremely cold. My special thanks, it goes to all the councillors, of course, especially the city councillor, Chris Mizey, that always he supported us, in the community. Always, I see him around the community. Today, I am in a support of the advisory Anti-Black Racism Committee. And once again, my name is Elena Tagrizadeh, and I am the Employment Economic Development Co-Chair at the Regent Park at this moment. And today I came on behalf of the committee to support this advisory committee for the Black people. It doesn't need to be Black to support them. My heart is really beating for all those Black people as partially grow up in that community, and I'm proud of them. The dedication that I have seen from this community, believe me, I have never seen anywhere. The heart feeling that I have for these people is extreme because of the support even that I am taking, from them. So definitely I have a responsibility and accountability to support them. But I would like, to just, read out few points regarding these advisory committees' work that they have done, and it is really appreciated. I would like just, remind few points, and I'm going, to read those, despite I do not like, to read from the paper, and I would like, to speak out, but sometimes I have to read out the points. The first point is historic and systemic issues. The advisory committee addresses the deep-rooted systemic nature of anti-Black racism in Toronto, which is essential for creating a fair and a just city. The second one, dedicated representation. It provides a dedicated mechanism to represent the interests and the concerns of the Black communities, ensuring their voices are heard in a decision-making process. Third, equitable outcomes. The committee helps the city partners with the Black-led organizations and other entities to achieve an equitable outcome in an area like child welfare, housing, healthcare, employment, and education. Next one, the barrier eliminations. Its focus on removing the barrier faced by the Black communities and improving their access to necessary services and programs. Another point that I would like to mention, that's a guidance and a support that this committee always offers to recognize these Black community, contribute their support and development, and promoting justice, particularly in policing and the criminal justice system. The last one that I would like to emphasize on it is an actionable recommendation. I am aware that this committee is not able to take the decision, but definitely these committees' recommendations guided the city councils and the city staff in making informed, effective actions. So therefore, I would love, from my heart and on behalf of the Employment Economic Development Committee to support this Black community regarding the anti-racism Black systems. And I urge the City Hall to make this a top priority and work together to promote equity and support and community development. And why not? We are from part of this community. All of us grow up in that community. We have to support each other, and we have to respect each other, and we have to help each other to grow more. And I would like to mention one thing, that I had a great really respect for the Chief Justice of Ontario, and I was grateful to meet him in person, and his name is Michael Tolok, that he is one of the Black people, and I am proud to meet him in person. and just be presented today among all of you. We need your support.
Thank you.
And
Please
thank you
wrap
very
up.
much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Perfect.
it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The next speaker is online. Damar Kamar Hewitt will be speaking in place of Anil Phillip. Welcome to committee.
Thank you for having me.
5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for having me, Chair and members of the committee, councillors. I am Damar Kamar Hewitt. I am the Executive Director of the Black Legal Action Center. And I appear today to support the recommendations being put forward by the Advisory Committee for the adoption of for the invitation to the Ontario Human Rights Commission to explore further the recommendations that are contained in their report. Now, the Black Legal Action Center, we're a not-for-profit legal clinic. Our mandate includes providing support to low or no-income Ontarians who are facing anti-Black racism issues. And we do that through providing legal representation, advocacy, and law reform. We do community initiatives and public legal education initiatives. And one of the areas in which we do provide these services is police complaints. And so this is an area that's of great importance to us. We do monitor all that's happening. We do pay close attention to the recommendations and the implementation of these recommendations. And we found that it is very important that the advisory committee be tasked to explore further the recommendations of the Ontario Human Rights Committee's report. And for us, it's important because it ensures that there's transparency and accountability. One of the recommendations of the Ontario Human Rights Commission at number 50 is for there to be legal enforceable mechanisms in place, and of course for there to be accountability measures in place within the Toronto Police Service. And for us, without those, then the drive to address these issues at the Toronto Police Force certainly would be defeated. Another important reason why we're supporting this is, of course, it allows us to collaborate. It allows us to come together with other community organizations to see that there is accountability of it. And for more work with the community partners, where we have found that there is, of course, the need for greater accountability. There's the need to build trust within the force. There needs to be trust within the network of partners that are doing these work. And that's why it is important that we hear and we impress upon the committee to adopt these recommendations. And of course, subject to any questions from the committee, that's our position.
Thank you for your deputation. I don't see any questions, so we'll move on to the next speaker is May Mohammed. May Mohammed is not online presently. Richard Martin. Is Richard Martin online? Not online. And the final speaker, Desmond Cole. Desmond Cole, welcome to committee. You have 5 minutes. Desmond Cole, online. Welcome to committee. You have 5 minutes. Is he connected?
Hello, can you hear me and see me?
Yes, please. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to speak in favor of these motions, or of this one motion, the 2 recommendations in it. First, when it comes to the issue of having the Ontario Human Rights Commission report back to this committee about issues of policing as addressed in this From Impact to Action report, I think it would be really good for this committee. I think it would be really good for members of the public. Many of us have been talking about a lot of the issues contained in this report, and particularly its recommendations, for a very, very long time. And I want to echo the comments just now of Mr. Hewitt that this is about transparency and accountability. Having the Ontario Human Rights Commission summarize these findings for your committee and through you, the public, I feel like what it does is highlights the importance of this report, which is historic in nature and took a long, long time to complete. It allows for another platform for the public to receive information, because the public is not going to read the hundreds of pages of these summaries and appendices and charts. But through the OHRC, I think that they can get a concise understanding of what's there. And I think that that would be really valuable. And as far as the other recommendation, which I understand to be reporting back to this committee, we so rarely get opportunities outside of the Toronto Police Services Board to ask questions and to understand what the police are doing about things that are recommended for their oversight. And I just wanted to raise that because we know that a lot of recommendations, well-meaning recommendations from a lot of reports over the years and decades, have simply disappeared. They go onto a shelf somewhere, they're not implemented, they leave the public conversation. I know that we're a long way, sadly, still a long way away from some of the most important recommendations in this report, including what I think is like the most substantive and systemic one, which is deleting all of the historical carding data. I know that this committee's job is not to do that, but if you can help us ask the police from time to time, what are they doing? What steps have they taken to poke them and prod them and give the public more opportunities to see if the police are actually going to be held accountable on this issue, if they will be taking this report seriously, as I know the committee does, the rest of us do, that would be helpful. It's not the only thing, it's not the final thing, but it's a good thing. And I want to say that I support that, and I hope that we will continue to hear about this report and the recommendations, because the activity that is being spoken about in this report is not historical. It's not from some time in the past and has now all been fixed because we had a quite comprehensive study. And the issues of people particularly having their data collected by the police, I'm just only talking about that because it's like the high line, seemingly high priority recommendation from this report. It's first in many of the things that I read about destroying data. We could talk about police brutality. We could talk about so many other things, which lead out from things like police stops that are unnecessary. But it would just be nice to actually see if the police intend to take the recommendations of this report. And one easy way for us to check up on that from time to time is for them to be able to report back to this committee. So I just wanted to say thank you for keeping this issue alive. It has been way too long that we have been speaking and talking about this issue. And we would all in the community love to see some action, and we want you to help us do that.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the deputant? No. Thank you for coming to committee. That concludes the deputations. So we're going to move now to questions of staff. Vice Chair Carroll.
Yeah, I was just using hand motions to ask my questions. Maybe I'll ask it into the microphone. I just want to be clear about the pathway here. Odessa's, I don't know if when people are virtually attending, whether or not they continue to listen to it. But what Desmond is, when he says this committee, he means the CABRAC committee. That's the pathway here, but you had to come here to enable that pathway. Am I right about that?
Yes, Councillor, you're correct.
Okay, so it's a matter of inviting these presentations there. And then I would assume, because I'm putting my police board hat on now, that presentation would happen, and if they're not satisfied with the answers they're getting, then next stop would be coming to the police board, which they can do as any citizen can. Am I right about that?
Yes, Councillor, and as part of the role of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit in supporting the members, that's something that we can reaffirm.
Okay. And maybe you can ask one other question. It may seem like it doesn't relate, but it does in the end, for me anyway. Has there, you'll be aware, Ms. Campbell, of the ARAP committee over at the police board, which was required out of the Andrew Loku inquiry, the anti-racism committee that was set up there, which has a really stellar membership. Have they had any interaction with CABRAC?
So what I would say, Councillor, is that in the past, the former manager of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit was a co-chair on ARAP, and so Anthony Morgan. So we tried to ensure that both through our partnership and accountability advisory table, that's the table, the resident citizen body that supports our ongoing work of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit. So we ensured that there were understanding and connections at that level. I don't believe, however, that there has been, this item has come formally to the CABRAC as part of our discussions.
Okay. And those are my questions, Madam Chair. I'll ask to be on the list to speak. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have a couple of questions. I note that there's a challenge, I think, in the motion as it relates to what entities are being actually referred to in the Ontario Human Rights Commission report. The letter provided by Mr. Kogali Ali states that Toronto Police Services and Toronto Community Housing, that these institutions, as highlighted in the OHRC report, which I think is what may have been discussed at committee, is it accurate that the OHRC does not highlight or focus on Toronto Community Housing in its report?
Thank you for the question, Chair Bravo. So the Ontario Human Rights Commission report focuses exclusively on the conduct of the Toronto Police Service and organization. It does not focus on or speak to the conduct of Toronto Community Housing. So we do see that as out of scope.
And I want to be careful about not addressing concerns that the committee may have had in relation to Toronto Community Housing, particularly with histories like that we were, people like us have been on the outside concerned about and protesting and wanting change. Think about the Neptune 4 and the harm that was done there. Are there any other sort of processes, or are there other vehicles or venues where the questions that the committee may have had are being addressed in relation to Toronto Community Housing?
So yes, Councillor, at the request and direction of the Toronto Community Housing's board, Social Development Division has been working with Toronto Community Housing through a third-party consultant to review the Community Safety Unit. Sorry, I have acronyms in my head. I have to speak in words. Community Safety Unit of TCHC. And the span of that includes questions around anti-Black racism. So that review has been underway. It has been engaging tenants, partners, staff, community members, and we'll be reporting later this year, which will include opportunities for engagement from the public.
So we can provide assurance to members of the public and members of the committee that has brought forward this recommendation that their concerns will be addressed, or are being, that there continues to be a vehicle to address those concerns. That's what you're telling me. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks. I'll be addressing that in a motion when it's time to speak. Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, the Vice Chair Carroll was the first to speak.
Yeah, I didn't need to ask questions of the deputy, but I did want to thank them for their comments. I want to say Desmond, because we've all known each other since we were kids. Mr. Cole, Mr. Cole is right to be concerned about the data. I'm concerned. We both go back on my previous term on the board to a lot of people weren't aware in the discussion of carding that the media tended to keep it up here at the street checks themselves. But the biggest concern for anyone who'd been subjected to it and every one of their dedicated moms, there was a PACER had a sort of subcommittee of just moms who just want to get my kids' data out of the system. And it is the most important piece is where'd that go? We do have evidence that some of it ended up right in the national CPIC. And so scrubbing that out is, because back in the day, there weren't a lot of records kept. So we keep being told about challenges, but I want to commit that whether or not the services, the board is still focused on it and beavering away at that. The board has had some recent changes in appointment that bring the focus back to that, because talk about something left undone. So that's a piece that, while it wasn't the singular focus of OHRC's report back in the day, it's a big piece in the community that we have to find. I dare say they'll when they do scrub that data, they'll find several of those cards will have my son-in-law's name in them, because there was a point at which street checks were so prevalent that all he had to do was get off a bus in his construction work gear, and he was going to end up having his data taken if someone was standing there. If an officer was standing there, it was that prolific in certain parts of the city. And so that will have to be dealt with. The pathway of this going to CABR, the police service, speaking to what they're doing there, I invite, but I also encourage some conversation between the two groups because of a recent experience. The chair currently of ARAP's meetings is Councillor Chang, who isn't on this committee. But we're going to appoint a new co-chair. Currently it's without a citizen co-chair, but people have stayed committed to that committee, even though it's one of those ones where it was put together because an inquiry ordered there to be one, but without a lot of belts and suspenders about what's its mandate, what's it supposed to do, and is it clerked, is it minuted, those things. When we had a meet and greet to make sure that myself and Mr. Brillinger as new members knew what was going on there, we discovered not a lot of procedure around it, and yet it has a lot of heft. It has some great minds in the field on it, and if they were working in concert with and occasionally communicating with the people in Cabrac, that'd be an unstoppable force. And so just to say that at the same time we're asking the police service to come and talk about the progress they're making to this committee, to Cabrac, at the same time there's more rigor going into ARAP to say we got to get to where it's really clear what you guys are doing, what our mental health group, MHAP out of another inquiry, and lastly PACER, which still exists, the Police and Community Engagement Review Committee that began during carding. It still exists. Unlike Cabrac, it advises city staff, doesn't directly advise the board. It advises service staff. And yet I have found returning to the board that it doesn't have a lot of connection to the community and the board the way it once did. It really directly meets with the service staff, and we're not actually getting the meeting schedule and being allowed to observe it. So I think Cabrac taking this move could lead to, okay, what are all these doing and what can they do together? So appreciate the request. Thank you.
Sometimes the button doesn't work for the microphone here. Councillor Fletcher.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on something that you said, Councillor Carroll, and that is really being clear. And I'm not sure it's from this particular meeting or through the committee that you chair, Councillor Moyes, or if it's through SDFA. But the layers of data that are out there, even though there's supposed to be only one layer, is a little surprising. So that there do appear to be a number of layers that might not be the ones that we've said are the official ones, but there's a number of layers of unofficial data about what you have or haven't done. And that often comes up when you're trying to cross the border, even if your charges have been dropped. The fact that you've been charged is still there somewhere. And so naively, we think everything's fine and go for a job and get the police check and nothing's there. I remember a few years ago, there was a young Black woman who had applied for a Metrolinx job and been hired at Metrolinx. You may remember this. And then turns out at the last minute, she was turned down for the job because of her police check. And for the life of her, she couldn't figure out what that was. But there's no requirement to say, well, here it is or anything else. So this is still going on. And I think getting to the bottom of it, how many layers, what are people really looking at? How deep can you dig in all of that layered data to say something about somebody when they're looking for a job? The other thing I'm unclear about is, in that context, is anybody who has been charged with simple possession, charged with marijuana possession, has that been completely expunged? And which layer has that been expunged for you? How does that work? Because if it isn't been completely gone, now somehow we have a former deputy premier, we have a former police chief who was an MP, and they're all in the marijuana business. And somehow, if you've been charged, you may still not have access to a job. So there's something really still funny. And when we're really looking at advancement and we're looking at taking out all of the barriers for Black youth to great jobs, etc., what is the playing field? What does it look like? I'm unclear what it looks like. And I'm not moving that here. I may move that at council so we actually understand. A no BS report. That's what I'm looking for.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I will speak to this. I want to thank the members of the committee for bringing this forward. I will be moving an amendment to the recommendation. It's amendment to, so the first part would stand. The second is a request that Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, SDFA, to invite the chair of Toronto Police Services to present their existing anti-Black racism initiatives and work to consider and adopt findings from impact to action following a report on anti-Black racism by Toronto Police Service. I think that the, first I want to say that the, it's to be intentional and to scope this right, that we focus on what was the subject of the OHRC's report. I think that there may be other questions in the future about how Toronto Community Housing Corporation is doing its work, and with our division here, Social Development Finance Administration. But I also, like the other members of the committee, I think it's fundamental to focus on this data problem from an economic development and inclusion perspective. There are so many instances of people whose livelihoods and lives have been destroyed because of the failure to destroy that data and the commitments that have been made to the public with broad support is that will happen. And I think you hear the energy in this committee to attend to that. I think specifically of one example that came to mind, and those of anybody that was involved with it, has been involved with the Toronto Community Benefits Network, will remember that the framework agreement with Metrolinx included hiring technical staff, administrative staff, as part of the building out of the Eglinton line. Well, two of the people that were hired were not able to pass a police check.
Right.
And they were never told why.
That's right.
So here we have a strategy to promote inclusion for qualified people, an opportunity where we're making massive, massive infrastructure investments, and the very beneficiaries of the strategy were denied and deprived of the possibility because of this unaccountable, ungoverned data. That really, I think, brought it all very clear to mind, and I'm very happy to hear Councillor Fletcher talk about the massive contradictions of all those cannabis, those marijuana arrests over time. Former chief of police who called people scumbags or whatever, and then went into the very business where so much criminalization of communities happen. And so I think that this is, looking at it from a community economic development perspective, this is a huge priority for us. We have to resolve these problems because people are being deprived of employment, even volunteering. You know, even if you want to get into the path of being able to contribute, you will be denied that, and you have no knowledge of why, because there's no eyes into it. And so thank you for the committee, and this is amendment is an effort to make sure that we're scoping this appropriately, and we'll see whether the committee supports it. Those are my remarks, and seeing no other speakers, on my motion, we can display that. All those in favor of the motion? Okay, that's unanimous. Item as amended, all those in favor of the item? That's also unanimous. Thank you. So that concludes that item.
The Economic and Community Development Committee's chair, Councillor Alejandra Bravo, amended the motion recommended by the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee. The motion adopted at the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee meeting and recommended to the Economic and Community Development Committee was request that Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, Social Development, Finance and Administration to invite the Ontario Human Rights Commission to present on the From Impact to Action final report on anti-Black racism by the Toronto Police Service to share key findings and recommendations from the report. 2. Request that Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, Social Development, Finance, and Administration to invite relevant city divisions and agencies, including the Toronto Police Service and Toronto Community Housing Corporation, to present their existing anti-Black racism initiatives and work to consider and adopt findings in the From Impact to Action final report on anti-Black racism by the Toronto Police Service. And the amended motion by the Economic and Community Development Committee is requested that Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, Social Development, Finance and Administration to invite the Ontario Human Rights Commission to present on the From Impact to Action final report on anti-Black racism by the Toronto Police Service to share key findings and recommendations from the report. Requested that Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, Social Development, Finance and Administration to invite the Chair, Toronto Police Service Board to present their existing anti-Black racism initiatives and work to consider and adopt findings in the From Impact to Action final report on anti-Black racism by the Toronto Police Service.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on all our social media platforms, and if you need more information, go to our website.
Thank you.